guys, Keith here. Okay, so time for an update video, and as with the last one, this one's seriously overdue. We're going back all the way to July the 5th when 2019.33 was released, and we're going all the way through to September 23rd when 2019.53 was released. So 21 releases. Needless to say, this is going to take a little bit of time. So just like last time, I'm going to break it up a little bit, and this video will start off with the handful of changes that have come into xSchedule over those times. So let's start back here. Finer grain control for MIDI event detection in xSchedule. So xSchedule has a whole bunch of events that it can receive. These are things that happen outside of xSchedule that it can then react to and cause things to happen. And I was working with a guy who was using MIDI to trigger things. And so what we did here was we added a bunch of rules around the data here. So having chosen your MIDI device, you can come in and choose a particular note. You can scan your device, etc. But then you can go in and say, I want to trigger if it's greater than this, or it's equal to this, or not equal to that, etc. This proved necessary because sometimes when the data comes in from the MIDI device, you might get not just a value of 0 or not 0 to indicate that something's happened, but you might get like a how hard a drum's been hit, or how hard a note's been played, etc. And so you may want to react. You may want to ignore the soft notes, and only when there's a really a loud note actually have the event trigger. And so you've now got that control over both the data 1 and the data 2 parameters that come in on the MIDI events. That creates a lot more flexibility in setting up events based on MIDI. So that's that one. Scrolling up. Enhance the xSchedule ping to show the failure count. I don't have any failures down here, but let's go and let's do that. Let's configure a remote. We'll 192.168.0.80. Close. Right, so it shows up here. Now what it's going to do is it's going to show the number of failures that have been received. Also, when it pings, it will ping once, and if that particular ping fails, it will actually try 3 times before it decides that yes, this thing is totally dead. But it only does that the first time it tries it. So that gives you the redness. Whereas previously it would only send the 1 ping packet, and if for some reason that got lost or wasn't responded to, it would immediately report it as red. And then of course a minute later when it pings again, it would be green because this time it didn't drop. So this makes it a lot less likely that you'll get things flipping backwards and forwards between failed and not failed. Generally, if something's failed, it's probably seriously failed. What people don't also know is, and I had to go and manufacture one here because there wasn't one here. Once you've got one here, you can right click here and you can add additional IP addresses. So I can come in here and I can put 192.168.0.1, which happens to be my router. And it will show up here. And this one, of course, is going to come up green because what do you know? That particular device is online. So that's the ping. Force valid show folder on xSchedule start. What this will do is when xSchedule starts up, it basically validates that the start folder is there, and if it's not there, it will prompt you for it. Previously, it wouldn't. It would just come up here with red text down the bottom here to say that basically it wasn't connected correctly, so it forces it in. Enhancing text display. So if we add a playlist. That's actually not useful. Let's edit that as an advanced playlist so that we can get to the text playlist item. And there's actually been a whole bunch of enhancements in here. The biggest enhancements is there's been enhancements to some of the movement. to try and clean that up and make it make a little bit more sense. But there's also now some additional things that are supported in this format here. Almost need to take a screenshot here. But if you take a look down, there's now, and of course I can't point at it because if I was pointing at it, but if you look down at the top there, you've got the running playlist and step names and albums and titles and all sorts of things, which you can now draw out of the MP3 file and put that on. So if you want to put up the name of the artist singing the song or the name of the song, etc., you can now just draw that directly from the MP3 file. You'll also notice there that there is a Twitter followers option as well. If I go back to it again. But it requires one parameter. It requires you to set the Twitter handle. So if you wanted to do that, you would come up to format and you would say percent Twitter underscore followers percent, and of course you'd put some text around it to say, these are my Twitter followers. And then you would come down here and you would put your the name of your show, lights on XY, ZZY or something, which would be your Twitter handle. Now, because the Twitter API for getting Twitter followers doesn't actually require you to sign on to your account, etc., you can go and find out the Twitter followers of any particular account. So this is all you have to do to set that up, and it will now display in basically real time the number of Twitter followers that you've got going. Now it does retrieve this, I think it's once per time that this playlist item plays. So if you have it showing up, in a song, at the beginning of the song, it will go and find the number of Twitter followers, and then it will display that number for the duration of that song. And next song, of course, it will go back and it will reload it all again. So I think that was the bulk of what was going on there. Couple of changes to the SMS plugin. Mainly here, there's a couple of things. So one is in the options here, you can now put this into test mode, and in test mode, that means that you don't have to have an account in order to test it out and try it. You just put it into test mode. You still have to set all of the other parameters on here. There are a couple of additional things on here. You can say here maximum messages per phone number, and so you can limit. Now 0 means that there is no limit, but if you want to stop someone from sitting out there and sending dozens and dozens of texts to your show, you can put in a number here like 4 or 5 or whatever, and once it reaches that particular number, it will just stop accepting messages from that phone number. And it won't respond to them or anything. So it stops someone spamming you and driving up the costs of responding to all those SMSs. Yeah, make the test service work without even, so when you put it into that test mode and you click OK, you can now come up to here and insert test messages, and you can say, test message 1, test message 2. And of course, if you'd configured your show, these messages would now start to appear. So you can fully test the SMS function without actually signing up to an SMS service, including things like putting curse words in and all that sort of stuff, and check to see how it handles it. So it just gives you a chance to try it out without having to invest all that time and effort. More comprehensive FPP remote and master support. So we've had master remote support for quite some time, but the implementation of it was a little bit imperfect. FPP's support for their master remotes has changed a bit over the versions. And so I've gone back in and reworked it all. The oldest mechanism was a broadcast mechanism. By far now, I think the most generally popular version is the multicast version, but there is also a unicast version here that you can use. That's useful if you want to route the FPP sync packets over multiple networks. Maybe you've got you're connected to your neighbor's place via the internet and you want to route it there. Then in theory, you could use FPP unicast to do that. But if you're on a single network, particularly a Wi-Fi network, I'd recommend you use the FPP multicast. So that works there. And from a remote perspective, you just have to say FPP and it will handle whichever one it finds. The other thing about this is that xSchedule now also responds to the discovery protocol on the Falcon Pi player. So in the Falcon Pi player, if you go into the remotes and you get a list of all the remotes that FPP can see, you'll now find that xSchedule shows up in that list. So it's discoverable by the Pi. So that was all of those changes. Change the xSchedule curl playlist item support HTTPS. So the curl playlist item, once again, we have to go into advanced mode. There's a curl playlist item here. Basically, this allows you to call any URL, pass any data that you want to any website. You would typically use it to trigger something on a website. You'd set your website up with a URL and you'd call it and it would maybe update the currently playing song or something like that. It used to be that these URLs could only be HTTP URLs. If you tried to use SSL, it wouldn't work because of the way we were doing the web connections. But now this should work quite happily with HTTPS. So that's that one. We showed the extra variables for the text playlist item. Moving a number of xSchedule items to their own threads to minimize pauses in playback. So what that means is we've got all of these playlist items that we can add here. Now, some of these can be a little time consuming to process. And consequently, some of them run on a separate thread. So once they get kicked off, instead of holding up the show playing, they actually run in a separate thread on their own and don't delay things. And so I've gone through all of these, and anywhere where there was something that potentially was going to take a bit of time to process, I've now moved those onto their own threads. So hopefully you won't see as many pauses in playback when some of those actions take place. You'll particularly notice it in things like, he says, trying to remember. I mean, things like the curl request is a classic example. We obviously don't want to wait for that to complete because who knows how long it's going to take the internet to respond. And there's a couple more. MQTT. So we support MQTT for both events. You can have an MQTT event. So if you want to start triggering your show using MQTT, you can do it here. The username and password field here for signing on to your broker should now work. So you should be able to put a username and password in there. Previously, if you had security set up, it wouldn't work. You can also, once again in advanced, this has been here for a little while, you've been able to add an MQTT event where you can basically publish a particular topic and some data. So you could publish back to your MQTT network which song is playing or something like that. And now again, you can put the user ID and password in here to allow security to work when it's publishing those events. We showed you the Twitter followers. The xSchedule API for speeding up and slowing down animation playback. So this particular change does not work for music because music is the speed of the playback is governed by the speed of the song. But when it comes to animations, the speed is actually self-determined by xSchedule. And so it's possible for us to actually speed up playback or slow it down. So if you go into GitHub, SMean, xlights, and go into the xSchedule folder, you'll find the API documentation text file. And if you run down to the bottom of this, he says, now he's just got to find it. Set step position. Okay, so you've got these two APIs. One is to adjust the frame interval by a certain number of milliseconds. So you can set it up by 5 milliseconds or down by 5 milliseconds. Now there is a minimum. The minimum is 15 milliseconds. It will not run a frame rate faster than 15 milliseconds, but you can slow it down to, I think, as much as a minute per frame. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can. You also have the ability to set the interval to a particular number of milliseconds as well. So you can actually pass in a specific value. If you set it to 0, it basically resets it back to the default rate inside the FSCQ file. So yeah, so you can put some adjustments in there and change the speed as necessary. Why would you want to do that? Well, you might want to do that if you were maybe playing a sequence to live music and the band is playing a little bit faster or a little bit slower, and so you just want to speed up the animations to maybe match better with the tempo that the band's playing with on a particular evening. And is there any more? There is. Ability to adjust for time zone problems in SMS. So this comes back to the SMS daemon in the options. You now have the ability to adjust in minutes the time zone from the source. And the reason we've put this in here is we have encountered some problems with some of the SMS providers where, although they come back and they in theory tell us the time zone, that the timestamps that they're sending us are dated, we've found some problems with them not always respecting daylight savings time and the like. So you may need to adjust this by typically an hour, either forward or back. And so you can put either a positive or negative number in here to make sure that when messages do eventually appear here, that the timestamp looks correct from the service. It was the only way that we could deal with it. It was either that or go back and complain to the vendor that their timestamps weren't respecting. They said they were GMT, but they were actually British summertime. And of course, that meant that when we converted it to the current time zone of the local machine, nothing made any sense. So that's it for the changes in xSchedule and the SMS daemon. I'm going to break the video here. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of that. And I will come back and we will do some of the xlights changes. Thanks a lot, guys.